All right, we are live, y'all. We are live. It is the fifth day of our second week. We're over here, actually. Fifth day of our second week. Congratulations. We have learned how to perform CRUD operations in a Flask app. Congratulate yourselves, because that is quite a feat. We've learned how to modularize our Flask apps so that we don't have one big long server.py file. We have learned what the MVC paradigm means, model view controller. And yesterday, we learned about how to implement relationships in our Flask apps. Relationships from one table to another with our one-to-manys, and also with our many-to-manys in the afternoon. We learn how to perform these join SQL queries, not only with one-to-many, but many-to-many. And we learned how to turn each of these dictionaries that we get back in our list into an actual instantiated object in a Python class. So that's pretty cool. This morning, we are going to find out how we validate the user's form. So we don't even want to add anything to our database if they give us rotten data. Right? So we want to make sure every time we have a form, no matter what stack we're working in, we want to make sure that the form data is valid. We never, ever want to trust the user to give us good data. We always want to double check that data before we ever let it touch the database. Okay, and that's what we're going to learn today, form validations. And then we're going to start the login reg portion of our Flask app. So it's going to be a big part of your Java stack and an optional part of your MERN stack, or the JavaScript stack. The JavaScript stack, formerly known as the MERN stack. So we'll learn how to perform how to register a user, how to log in a user. Login is also known as authentication. And that'll be the end of the video, the second part of this video this morning. When we come back in the afternoon, we'll finish that login reg right up. So that is our game plan for today. Hope that you're excited, because login reg is something that we're going to have to really know how to do, no matter what stack or language or framework we're working in. Even if it's MERN, right? We know it's not part of our exam. It's an optional part of exam. We may need to do it for the black belt functionality in our MERN exam, but if you start developing in the MERN stack, then you're absolutely going to have to know login reg. So this is a very important skill to have as a web developer. And that is our game plan for today. We're going to learn about how to validate form data. We're going to make a new static method in our class to validate this form data. We did class methods, if you recall. We did class methods for every single CRUD operation for our normal objects. Class methods we used, but for validations, we're going to use static methods. And you'll see we're just going to use if statements to check to see if all of the data being passed to us from the user is valid. And if it is not valid, we're going to use something called flash to let the user know where they messed up. Okay. So we're absolutely going to get into the details of what flash is. So let's go ahead and get started. Now I'm just going to start from the very beginnings here. I'm going to go ahead and create a model, create a database in my SQL Workbench, and I'm going to create a model in my Flask app, and then just walk you through how I go ahead and validate it. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to pause it for a second right here. All right, I'm back. This is what we're going to be building. We're going to have an album. So this is for an imaginary website where users can log in and they can add albums to their wish list. This thing is called Vinyl Countdown. And this is what one album looks like. It'll have a title, an artist, a description, and it'll also have a Boolean that you don't see here, but it'll just default to false. It's going to be whether we own this album or not. So obviously, if this is like a wish list, when we add an album, we're not going to own it yet. We're going to be able to flag that album as an owned album later on. And we'll be able to edit this album and make sure that we set it to true if we do end up buying that album. So this is what we're going to model here in my SQL Workbench. So let's go ahead and get on started here. I already made it. You know what? Let's just get rid of this. We'll just drop that schema. And we'll go home and click the tables and click the plus to create a new model. First thing I want to do is edit the schema. So we'll call it albums schema. And then we'll add a new diagram. Click our new table. Click anywhere here to make a new table. Let's make it larger here. And now we can edit this. So I'll call this table albums. Set the ID primary key to auto increment. Then I need a title. I'll just keep varchar, make it not null. I need an artist. Keep varchar, make it not null. And I need a description. And let's make this, you can make it like varchar 255, or you could just make it a text. I'll make it a text. But I'll also want that to be not null. And then our hidden Boolean here, at first anyway, when you first create an album, this is going to default to false. So I'll call this is owned, and it'll be a Boolean. Now, well, as soon as I hit return on this, you'll see what my SQL Workbench changes this into. It'll change it into a tiny int. And that's how my SQL Workbench stores Booleans, as a tiny int. So 0 will be false and 1 will be true. So we want to make sure that we default that to 0. Okay, that means false. So I don't need a not null here because I have a default expression. Any one of your columns that doesn't have a default expression, you want not null on it. So that's why I chose not to have it on is owned, because it'll default to false. And of course, we want our created at as a date time, default to current timestamp, and I want an updated at a date time, default to current timestamp on update current timestamp. And that's the whole shebang, folks. Not much to it. Let's go ahead and forward engineer so I can start querying this schema. Cool. So if that's successful, you can go back home, click the dolphin and log in, and you should see the album schema here. And I do. And I could take a look at the tables, make sure that all is kosher. ID, title, artist, description is owned, created at, updated at, all looks well. Great. So let's go ahead and make this model in our Flask app. So let's actually, we're not going to use this window. I'm going to make a new window. So first I want to just start up a new Flask app. So let's start from the beginning here. I'm going to go all the way to my home directory here. If I PWD, then you'll see I'm in my home directory here. And I want to go and create this in my Flask. Where I want to make this in the validations folder. So let's make sure that I can reveal that folder in the Finder, which is over here on my other screen. So right here. So I just want to be able to just drag that folder in my terminal after I type CD+. That's why I want to reveal in Finder, just so I could see that folder. So let's go ahead and drag that in and hit enter. And now I'm in my validations folder. Okay. Now I'm in here. I could make my project directory. So that's mkdir. We'll call it albums. What do we call it? Albums app. We call it albums app. And then right away, I want a CD right into it. So I'll do an and CD albums app. So creating it and changing into it at the same time. Boom. Now I'm inside my albums app directory after having created it. Cool. So in here, I want to make a server.py. And I also want to make a Flask app folder. So let's do that as well. mkdir Flask app. Oh, and CD Flask app. I suppose I could just go ahead and do the same thing, right? Create that Flask app folder and CD into it in the same fell swoop. And there we go. In here, I need 4 folders. So let's create those all at the same time. We need a config, a controllers, a models, and a templates folder. All 4 of those, just make them all at the same time, much faster that way, right? And if I ls here, and I see I have those 4 directories created. So let's CD up 1 level here, because I still have to create my virtual environment, and that's CD space ... You want to create your virtual environment in your root directory of the project, okay? So I want to make sure I'm in albums app, not in Flask app. That's why I went up 1 level, okay? Cool, so now that I'm in the root directory of my project, I can go ahead and create that virtual environment with the pipenv command. So after that, I want, of course, Flask, and I want MySQL, and I think that's going to be it. Yeah, we're going to need another thing later, but for now, Flask and MySQL are all a-okay. So let's go ahead and create that virtual environment and install these packages. Oh, what did I do? pipenv. Oh, I forgot the install keyword, right? So install, right? So I need, and you see that Flask bcrypt is what we're going to need later. But for now, we want to pipenv install Flask and MySQL. So let's go ahead and wait for that to be done installing very quickly. That's nice. Now I can activate my virtual environment with pipenv shell. Now I can see that, yes, it has been activated. And now let's just go ahead and open this directory in VS Code. So code space dot. And here I am back in VS Code. And I've got all of the necessary directories created. I've got my pip files. I've got my server.py. It's empty, of course, but I'm all set to go. So the first thing that I want to do here, remember, is choose the correct interpreter. Otherwise, I'm not going to get the help that I want. So let's choose that by clicking here, and I'll scroll down to Albums app. Great. Let's go ahead and start coding here. So my server is going to import the app from my Flask app. So that's actually the first thing that I want to do. So let's go in my Flask app and create my init.py, my dunder init.py. So this is dunder init and another dunder.py. And we'll go ahead and from Flask, import Flask and instantiate our app. So app equals Flask, and we want dunder name in here. Now, while we're here, we could just bring in all of the imports that we need, and we can also set our secret key. It's going to be for session, but it's also going to be for flash, those flash messages, which will show the user exactly what they did wrong, so that they could fix the form input, the form data. This flash that we're going to talk about relies on session under the hood. So that's why we need our app.secret key, because session, as you know, needs to sign those cookies with the secret key. So we don't get any tampering with the cookies. So let's go ahead and set the secret key here now. And that's app.secret key. We'll set that to my favorite little trick here. So we'll enter the Python REPL. We'll from secrets import token hex, and then we'll just print an invocation of the token hex function. And there it is. Let's go ahead and exit out of here, out of the REPL, and close that tab and paste that in as our secret key. Now I'm going to need to bring in a couple of more things from Flask. I know all the things that I need, well, at least I think I do, but why don't we just bring all of our imports here in the dunder init. So I need a render template, I need a redirect, I need request, I need session, and I need flashed. I don't think I'll need anything else, but we'll find out shortly. This flash we will talk about, but we know about session, we know about request, of course, we know redirect and render template. So I want to bring them all in my dunder init. Now that that's done, I can go ahead and start coding my server.py. So let's import that app from dunder init. So I'm going to say from Flask app, import that Flask app. Now that I have that Flask app, excuse me, I can just see if dunder name equals dunder name, dunder main. And if that is the case, go ahead and run the app with debug equals true. My host as localhost, and my port as 5001. Okay. In here, we will also have to import our controllers, but I haven't made those yet. But it's not a bad idea to just sort of remind yourself here. So remember to import controllers. Okay. Now I'm done with my server.py. I can close that up. And it's the way that I like to build my MVC apps is from the ground up. And I consider the ground to be the model layer of the MVC paradigm. So let's go ahead and make a new file here in my models directory, and I'll call this album model.py. Okay. So in here, I'm going to, what am I going to need? I'm going to need Flash. But you know what? Let's wait on that. Let's just go ahead and make our class. So I'll say class album. And then my first one was my first function or method rather that I need in my class is always going to be that dunder in it, the constructor method. So we'll define our dunder in it. So we're going to, of course, pass in self, but we're also going to pass in data. We remember that from the past couple of days. But now I just want to set all of my columns to the equivalent key in the or value in the data dictionary. So let's go ahead and do that. I want every single one of them, right? So self.id is going to be equal to the data ID, self.title, data at the title and key, self.artist at data artist, artist, self.description. It's going to be at data description. And then our Boolean self.is owned will be data is owned and created at and updated at. Well, I misspelled here, created at. All right, and there we go. There's my model for my album. I also like to, if I ever need to print out any of these objects, then I don't like to just see that memory location that does nothing for me. So let's go ahead and define or redefine rather, override the REPR method, okay? So we're going to return a new string, not that weird string with the memory location. What we're going to return is an F string here. And I like to style these with angle brackets at the bookends. And we'll just say album, and we'll get the title of the album. So that'll be a call to self.title. Okay. Let's see here. Now, what do we want to do? We do want to be able to create things. So, you know what? Let's go ahead and grab some stuff from my template that I showed you guys. So I'll switch over to my other window here. And my code snippets will have a template model. So in here, I'm going to need to create a thing, of course. So let's grab the create class method. Copy that, and we'll go ahead and go on back. Not to that window, but this window. Go ahead and paste that in. It's yelling at me here because I need to bring in my connect to MySQL function, and I need to define this database variable. So let's first define the database variable here. I'll go up here and I'll say database equals, and then this is going to be equal to the schema name in your MySQL. So albums underscore schema. Albums underscore schema. That's our database. And we need our connect to MySQL, but I haven't even made that file yet. So let's go ahead and make it. That's going to be in the config folder. Let's call this MySQL connection.py. And I also save that in my snippets file over here, which is right here. So let's just select all and copy and switch on back and paste it in. So now I can go ahead and import it into here so VS Code can stop yelling at me. So that's going to be from Flask app.config dot MySQL connection import connect to MySQL. Now all of that is well and good, except I gotta change all of the occurrences of thing into album. So let's go ahead and do that. So I want to select one of these and call up my find. Click this arrow so I get the replace. And I want to replace everything with album and preserve case. So go ahead and click that AB here to preserve case, and we'll just replace all of them. Boom. Okay. So now I have insert into albums and returning an album ID and a little printout here so I can be sure that this album was created. Now I need to change these columns to the actual columns of my album object. So let's go ahead and do that. I need title, artist, description, and is owned. Oops. And then is owned. Oops, is owned. And we need another one of these. So let's copy all of that. Paste that in. And change it to is owned. Oh, wait a minute. Is owned is going to be false, right? So, oh yeah, this is actually fine because I'm going to create that album in my controller and default is owned to false over in my controller. Okay, so this is all well and good. Let's go ahead and make that form and see if we can see it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to need to see it, right? So controllers will be first. Let's make our album controller. Album controller.py. I'm going to need to bring in the album model here. So from Flask app.models.album model, import album. And we'll start making our routes. Oh, we need our app. From Flask app, import app. Now we can start making our routes. App.get. So let's show the user the form, right? Display form to create an album. And let's make this at albums/new. And let's define new album. And we just return and render. Oh, so I got to bring that in as well. So from Flask app, we'll import the app. We'll also import render template. I'm probably going to need redirect here. So let's start with that. And we'll return a rendered template here of new album.html. And let's go ahead and make that template. New album.html. Boilerplate action. We'll call this the vinyl countdown. Gonna need bootstrap. Gonna need the JavaScript. And then we'll bring in my bootstrap navbar. We'll say the vinyl countdown. And then what will my links be? All albums. I already have that. Cool. I should probably change that in my user snippet though. But this will take me back to /albums. And I'll need another one. So let's clone that down. And this will take me to the form. So let's say add an album right here. And I think that's good for now. Let's just see if we could see this. Okay. So if I go to album/new, fire up my server and go to album/new, I should be able to see this thing. Let's fire up the server. Cool. So I want to go to localhost 5000 /albums/new. And oh, I forgot to import my controllers. So let's go back to server.py and import the controller. So from classcap.controllers, import album controller. And that should do it. And there we go. So we have our vinyl countdown, navbar, and we should be able to see that hamburger menu that is fully functional. Great. Okay, so I don't want the user to actually manually type that in. So let's build in a redirect in our album controller. Let's go up here though. Redirect the user to the form. And this is all probably going to change eventually, but let's just go ahead and build this in, okay? At get from the root route, all we're going to do is redirect to the form. So let's call this redirect to form, and we'll just, oops, return a redirect to a route. And this is the route we want to redirect to. So now, if I just go to 5001, I get redirected to album/new, which is what I want. All right, so now in the HTML, let's build that form out. It's going to be under the nav, of course. And I could just collapse that nav now. I'm done with it. So let's do .container, .row, .call, .card, h5.card header. We say add an album, and our card body, which will hold our form, which we want as a post. So this will be the route that will process this form. So I want albums, staying RESTful routing. All right, so in here I want a .mp3 to get the margin bottom. And I'll take a label with the bootstrap class, with the bootstrap class of form-label. And this will be for title. It'll say title. And it'll just be a text input with the bootstrap class of form control. Name is title and ID is title. So I want this once more for the artist. You know what? Let's do our little. No, I think I can. We'll do artist. make this capital. And then I want the description here. But it's not going to be an input, it's going to be a text area. So let's get rid of that. But I do want to change these to description. And pop in that text area with the Bootstrap class of form control. And then I want description for the name and description for the ID. Since it's Bootstrap, we don't need calls or rows. Now all that's left is our submit button. So I like these to be on the right. So .deflex, .justify, content, and we'll make a submit button. So that's an input of type submit with the Bootstrap class of BTN, and we'll make it blue. The button will say add album. So let's see what that looks like. And there it is, our Bootstrap class, our Bootstrap form rather. So let's tile this to the right and let's get our split screen action going on here because we don't need all of that room. Cool. So what I want to do is to be able to validate all of the user input here, okay? So I'm going to go back to my model here and create a new static method, okay? So let's write a little note to ourselves here. This static method validates the user's form input. So we want a decorator for static method. And let's call this validate album. So we're going to need to pass in some data here. And this data is going to come from the form. So why not just call it form? Okay. Now in here, we're going to first set a flag. We'll call it is valid. And we will assume that the form is valid to start out. Okay. In our successive if checks throughout this static method, if anything fails validation, then we're going to go ahead and flip that to false. So that's what that's for. Right. So the first thing I want to do is just to check to see if the length of what the user entered for the title is long enough. Okay. So I'll build in my if, and we'll call on the len function in Python. And we want to check the length of what the user entered in the form with the input that is named title. And then we'll check to see if that is less than 3 characters. Okay. So this is the name of the input. Remember, that's the most important part. Okay. The name of that input. Oh, here it is. Right here. Okay. The name. So if it is less than 3, then that's going to fail validation. So I don't want anything less than 3. You know what? Let's make this 2. There are 2 character album names. So I'm going to make that 2 instead. And then I'm going to go ahead and say flash that message. Now let me just write this flash message before we explain it. And maybe you just kind of figure this out as I do it. Okay. So I'm going to flash with a string argument here. And I'll say title must be at least 2 characters. And obviously, if it is less than 2, then I want to flip is valid right on over to false. Oh, equal. Forgot my assignment operator. So there we go. And so now that you've seen how to implement Flash, let's talk about what it is. So I said earlier that Flash is something we're going to have to import. We're going to, oh, I didn't import that. So I don't want it from curses, whatever curses is, right? But I want that from our Flask app. So we want from Flask app, import Flash. Okay. Now that we've got the correct Flash, let's talk about what it is. Okay. So I talked about it a little bit earlier, but Flash relies on session under the hood. And we know what session does. Session allows us to persist data from request to request, so we can establish a conversation with the user. Flash also allows us to hold on to data from request to one request. It actually is a temporary storage, just like session, but with Flash, it only lasts until you render it on a template. So it stays in the server memory until we actually show it to the user. As soon as we show it with a built-in Flask method called getFlashedMessages, until we show it using that method, it stays in the server's memory. Only when we display that message, this Flash message, does it actually go away. Okay, so let's just actually see what happens here. At the very end of everything, we're going to want to return is valid, right? We're going to return this Boolean variable here. So I think you can probably guess what's going to happen here. We're going to call this validate album function in our controller. And if it is false, meaning if it fails validations, then we're going to go ahead and redirect the user back to this route that displays the form, and then flash our Flash messages right here. Okay, so let's just see how that is done. I'm going to go back to my controller here, and let's go ahead and make that post handler. So this post handler is going to, the route is going to match your form's action. So might as well copy that. And now let's build in our post handler. Paste that in as a string. And we'll say create album. Now in here, I'm just going to check if this form is valid, if it contains valid information. So the first thing that I want to do is call that static method. So from the album model, I want to call that. So that's going to be if not album dot validate album. Remember what we need here. We need to send it the form. So how do we get the form in a post route? Yep, request dot form. Oh, which means I also need to bring in request. So let's bring request in here. Okay. All right. So if this comes back false, right? If this comes back false, then I want to return a redirect back to the route that displays the form. And that's this one, right? This one right here. So we'll redirect the user back to that route if they fail validation. So let's just see if that works, right? I can click our submit button, and obviously this is going to fail my validations, right? I'm not going to enter anything in this form, much less what I'm looking for in my title, right? If my title is less than 2, this is going to return false, and I'll get redirected right back here. So it's going to look like I haven't left, but we should see a little bit of change here. So let's give it a whirl. Yep, see that little really quick redirect here? That's what's going on. So obviously I want to show these messages to the user. So how the heck do we display these messages? Well, let's find that out here. Let's go to our HTML. And we want to decide where we want to display this stuff. So I like to just go ahead and display it right inside the body of my card. You could do it wherever you like, but here's where I will display it. These are going to be Jinja expressions. So we need our curly, and we need our 2 percentages. And right here, we're going to say with messages. Now this with keyword, this is a Python keyword. It's not particular to Python. The with keyword allows me to create a variable that I'm naming messages. And as soon as I'm done with my messages variable, it will get deleted. That's what the with does. It creates a variable and also performs cleanup for me, right? We know whenever we create a variable, we need, well, most of the time anyway, we can set its value at the same time. So we're going to set this equal to that built-in Flask function that I talked about, get flashed messages. So we'll say get flashed messages, just like that. And let's not forget to end our with. And that's one word, so end with. Okay, now inside our with, we want to for loop if there are any messages. So the first thing we want to do is check if there are any messages. So we're going to need another set of curlies, another set of percentages, and we'll check if there are any messages. Okay, if there aren't any messages, this thing is going to be empty, right? Get flashed messages returns all of the messages, these flash messages. And if there are any, then I want to loop through them. But whenever I open up a control structure, I want to make sure I end it right away. Now that I am in my if, I can start my for. So another set of curlies and another set of percentages. And we'll do a for message in messages. And let's end our for before we forget. And for. Great. Now, finally, I can display these messages. So I'll just display it in a p tag, and I'll make sure that that text is red with the Bootstrap class of text danger. And in here, I want just double curlies. And then I just want to display the message. And there we go. Let's just see if that works. We'll refresh here. And there we go. So I told you that these flashed messages, they last until we show them to the user. That's why you see this repetition, because I pressed this add album with an empty form 3 times. So these were stacking in my flashed messages. But now that I have displayed them, they have been deleted from the server's memory. So if I refresh again, they'll be gone. And there they go, Gonzville, okay? Now I should be able to just get that validation whenever I want, and one at a time, okay? Obviously, you want to make sure that they enter the artist and the description as well. So let's go ahead and build those in. And they're just going to be like this one. So let's go ahead and clone that down a couple of times. We'll change this to artist. And this to description. So now we should get all three. Boom. So that's how we basically validate a form. Now you may be wondering, well, how can I display this message underneath the appropriate input? Right? We want to give the user a little bit more help than that. We want to display it in the appropriate place. Well, we can absolutely do that. And let me show you how. Let me go back to my album model. Oh, well, I'm here in my album model. In order to do that, we're going to have, in addition to our custom validation message, we're going to also have a category. You see this definition that pops up. We can also add a category, which is a string. So why don't we just give it a string so I can display it at the appropriate spot, right? This is the category here. So I'm going to manually add that category of title so I can display this message underneath the title input. This is only half the battle. You'll see what how I'm going to have to change the template in just a second. Let's also do the same for all of the other ones. Okay, and that's done. I've added my categories. Now let's change our template. We're going to need to do this inner stuff a few more times. So I'm going to bring this end width down until right after the form. You'll see why in just a second. Right there. So right before the form ends, I want to end my width. Let's see, where is it supposed to actually be? Let's put it over here. And then why is it this lined up correctly? That's okay. Now I want to add an argument here to get flashed messages. I don't quite remember what it is, but I think categories equals true. But let's see here. So I import that in my init, and I'll know what it needs. Get flashed messages. So if I want to try that here. Okay, so I need with underscore categories true. It's a good way to just figure out what it means. So let me just get rid of that. And then say with underscore categories equals true. Okay. Now this whole block here, I'm going to cut and paste it right underneath the appropriate input. And let's make sure this is a little bit better at formatting. With categories equals true. And then right here, after I check if there are any messages, I want to say also message category. So I want to have two iterators here for message and category in messages. Okay. Now I want to check to see if the category equals title, because that's what I set way back over in my model. Let's close some of this stuff up. Right? I want to see if the category equals title. So let's do that right in here. If category equals title. Then I want to put that message in. Okay. So let's go through that again before we try it out. I moved my end width all the way down till right before the form ends, because I'm going to repeat all of this stuff after every input. Then under every input, I'm going to essentially copy and paste this whole block, which first checks if there are any messages. And if there are any messages, we're going to iterate through all the messages with two variables here, message and category. If the category equals the input we're at, then we'll go ahead and output that message. So we're going to need this underneath here and change this to artist. And we're going to also paste it underneath the text area and change this to description. And I think that's all well and good. So let's give it a whirl. Oh, I did something wrong. Let's see. So with categories, let's see. Get flashed messages, categories. Spell that wrong. Let's see here. Flashing with categories. Oh, under lowercase t. Oh, that's odd. Python is uppercase. Let's try it. That still didn't work. Okay, so what did I do wrong? So with messages, get flash messages with categories equals true. If messages, then for, oh, category comes first. Okay, so this gets returned in a specific spot, in a specific order, and you can't have the wrong order. So let's make category first and give it another whirl. And there we go. So we want to change all of these. That's what I get for trying to do it from memory. You shouldn't have to memorize any of this stuff. Just look it up. So let's try it again. And there we go. Now these are a little bit big. I made them P's. So let's actually change them to the Bootstrap class of form text. So they're smaller. Okay, let's try it again. There we go. That's better. Cool. And that is basic form validation, y'all. Hopefully you'll have as much fun with it as I do. When we come back, we'll start talking about login registration. Thanks. I don't know how long that video was, so I'm going to stop the video now, check how long it was. If it was less than an hour, then I'll go ahead and start login reg. Or maybe I'll just make it a separate video. And you know what? I'm just going to make it a separate video. Okay, so this is just your basic form validation video, and I'll start a new one for login reg. Okay, thanks, guys.